The scorching summer sun beat down mercilessly on Shafter, Texas, as Nora Vaughn's world collapsed around her in the bustling marketplace. "Thief!" The accusation rang out like a gunshot, silencing the usual hum of bartering and conversation. Every pair of eyes in the dusty trading post turned to stare at the young woman with copper hair who stood frozen, her hand still outstretched toward a bolt of blue fabric she had been admiring just seconds before. The year was 1876, and in the unforgiving landscape of West Texas, accusations carried weight that could crush a person's reputation or worse, end their life. Nora, 22 years old and new to Shafter, felt her throat constrict as the shopkeeper, Mr. Diggs, gripped her wrist so tightly that pain shot up her arm. I caught her red-handed, trying to slip this silver brooch into her pocket. Diggs shouted, his face reddening as he held up an ornate piece of jewelry Nora had never seen before. "Been missing items for weeks now. Knew I'd catch the culprit eventually. No, please, I didn't take anything." Nora's voice emerged as a whisper, her green eyes wide with terror as the crowd pressed in closer, their faces transforming from curiosity to judgment in an instant. "I was just looking at the fabric. I don't even know what brooch you're talking about." "Save your lies for the sheriff, girl," Diggs snarled, tightening his grip until Nora winced. "We don't take kindly to thieves in Shafter." The crowd grew louder, a chorus of accusations and suggestions for punishment filling the air. Nora felt dizzy with fear, her vision blurring around the edges as someone called for Sheriff Wilson. In a town where she knew almost no one, where she had arrived just 2 months prior to work as a seamstress after fleeing a difficult past in Boston, Nora realized she stood alone against a tide of hostility. "She is innocent." The deep, resonant voice cut through the noise like a knife. The crowd parted as if by magic, revealing a tall man standing at the edge of the gathering. His wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his features, but there was no mistaking the authority in his stance or the quiet power in his words. Dust coated his leather vest and the worn denim of his pants, marking him as someone who had just ridden into town. "And who might you be to declare such a thing?" Diggs demanded, though his grip on Nora's wrist loosened slightly. The man stepped forward, and as he moved into the light, Nora saw his face clearly for the first time. His jaw was strong and set with determination, his eyes the color of a storm-darkened sky. A thin scar traced a line from his temple to his cheekbone, telling silent stories of past conflicts. "The name's Tucker O'Malley," he said, removing his hat and revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the edges. "And I saw what happened here." Nora stared at the stranger, this unexpected champion who had materialized from nowhere. He couldn't be much older than 30, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of experiences beyond his years. "This man," Tucker continued, pointing at Diggs, "slipped that brooch into the lady's vicinity himself when she wasn't looking. I watched him do it from across the street." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Diggs's face paled, then flushed with anger. "That's preposterous. Why would I accuse someone of stealing my own merchandise?" Tucker's gaze remained steady. "Maybe because this isn't the first time you've tried this trick. Word travels, Diggs. Even to those of us who don't stay in one place too long." Sheriff Wilson pushed through the crowd then, his weathered face creased with annoyance. "What's all this commotion about?" Before Diggs could speak, Tucker stepped closer to the lawman. "Sheriff, I'd suggest you check Mr. Diggs's right coat pocket. If I'm not mistaken, you'll find at least 3 more items he's planning to claim were stolen by unsuspecting customers." The marketplace fell silent as the sheriff's eyes narrowed. "That true, Diggs? Ridiculous." "I won't stand for, empty your pockets then." the sheriff interrupted. "Should be simple enough if you've nothing to hide." Diggs hesitated, his eyes darting between the sheriff and Tucker. That moment of uncertainty was all the confirmation anyone needed. When the shopkeeper tried to back away, two men from the crowd moved to block his retreat. Under the sheriff's watchful eye, Diggs reluctantly emptied his pockets. True to Tucker's accusation, 3 small items tumbled out: a silver pocket watch, a jade hair comb, and a small pearl-handled knife, all items of value that could easily be slipped into a distracted customer's pocket or basket. "Well, well," the sheriff drawled, picking up the items. "Seems we have ourselves a different kind of thief." He turned to Nora. "My apologies, Miss Vaughn," she supplied, her voice still trembling. "Nora Vaughn, Miss Vaughn, seems you've been wrongfully accused." He gestured to one of his deputies. "Take Mr. Diggs to the jailhouse. We'll sort this out properly." As Diggs was led away, protesting his innocence to increasingly deaf ears, the crowd began to disperse, some casting apologetic glances Nora's way, others simply moving on to the next spectacle. Within minutes, only Nora and her mysterious defender remained, standing in the shadow of the shop's awning. "Thank you," Nora said, finally finding her voice as she rubbed her wrist where Diggs's grip had left angry red marks. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up." Tucker O'Malley settled his hat back on his head, his expression unreadable. "No need for thanks. I've got no patience for men who prey on others." He glanced at her injured wrist. "You should get some cold water on that." Nora nodded, studying his face. "How did you know?" "About the other items, I mean." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Like I said, word travels. I've been tracking Diggs for a while now. He's pulled this same scheme in 3 towns that I know of. Accuses newcomers or those passing through of theft, then demands payment to avoid involving the law. Most folks pay rather than face a trial in a town where they have no friends." "That's terrible," Nora said, horrified by the thought of how many others might have suffered under Diggs's false accusations. Tucker shrugged. "That's why I made it my business to stop him." He looked around the marketplace, now returning to its normal rhythm. "You're new to Shafter?" "Yes, I arrived about 2 months ago. I'm a seamstress at Mrs. Holloway's shop on Pine Street." He nodded as if filing away this information. "Well, Miss Vaughn, I suspect you won't have any more trouble from Diggs, but if you do—" He paused, seeming to reconsider whatever he had been about to say. "Just be careful. Not everyone in these parts is as forthcoming about their intentions as our friend Diggs turned out to be." With that cryptic warning, he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of farewell and turned to walk away. Nora watched him go, this stranger who had defended her without hesitation, wondering if their paths would cross again in a town as small as Shafter. She couldn't have known then how deeply their lives would soon intertwine, or that the incident in the marketplace was only the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. The following morning dawned clear and already warm as Nora made her way to Mrs. Holloway's dress shop. Her nerves still felt raw from the previous day's events, but she couldn't afford to miss work, especially not after the spectacle at the market had surely reached Mrs. Holloway's ears by now. The shop bell tinkled cheerfully as she entered, a sound at odds with the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Mrs. Holloway, a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and exacting standards, looked up from where she was measuring fabric. "Nora, dear," she said, setting aside her scissors. "I heard about that dreadful business yesterday. Are you all right?" Relieved by the concern in her employer's voice, Nora nodded. "Yes, madam. It was frightening, but fortunately it all got sorted out. Thanks to that cowboy, I hear." Mrs. Holloway's eyes twinkled. "Tucker O'Malley, isn't it? He's quite the mysterious figure around these parts. Shows up every few months, keeps to himself mostly, then disappears again. Nora's pulse quickened at the mention of his name. You know him. Know of him is more accurate. He's done odd jobs for my husband's brother out at the Triple H Ranch. Has a way with horses that borders on magical, according to Henry, but no one knows much about where he comes from or where he goes. Mrs. Holloway gave Nora an appraising look. He must have seen something special in you to step in like that. Heat rose to Nora's cheeks. I think he just happened to witness Mr. Diggs's deception. It could have been anyone. Mrs. Holloway made a noncommittal sound and returned to her work. Well, whatever his reasons, I'm grateful he was there. You're the finest seamstress I've had in years, and I'd hate to lose you to some ridiculous misunderstanding. The rest of the morning passed in the familiar rhythm of work measuring, cutting, stitching. Nora found comfort in the precision required. The way it forced her mind to focus on the task at hand, rather than dwelling on yesterday's humiliation, or the mysterious Mr. O'Malley. By noon, she had nearly convinced herself that she would never see him again, that he had already moved on to the next town and the next injustice that needed righting. Then the shop bell rang. Nora looked up from the bodice. She was embellishing with tiny pearl buttons to find Tucker O'Malley himself standing awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hand. The sight of him in the feminine domain of the dress shop, surrounded by bolts of fabric and half-finished gowns, might have been comical if not for the intensity of his gaze as it found hers. Mr. O'Malley, Mrs. Holloway greeted him warmly. What brings you to our humble establishment? Surely not in need of a new dress. Her teasing tone seemed to put him slightly more at ease. No, madam, he replied with a small smile. I was hoping to have a word with Miss Vaughn, if that's acceptable. Mrs. Holloway's eyebrows rose, but her smile remained. Of course. Nora, why don't you take your lunch now? You can use the garden out back if you'd like some privacy. Before Nora could formulate a response, she found herself being ushered toward the back door, Tucker following behind. The garden was really just a small patch of earth behind the shop where Mrs. Holloway grew herbs and a few hardy flowers, but it offered a bench in the shade of a gnarled mesquite tree and, as promised, privacy from curious ears. This is unexpected, Nora said once they were seated, maintaining a proper distance between them on the bench. I thought you might have left town already. Tucker set his hat beside him, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed unconscious. Not yet. I have some business to finish here first. He looked at her directly then. How's your wrist? Nora glanced down at the faint bruises that circled her wrist like a bracelet. It's fine. Hardly hurts at all now. Good. That's good. He seemed to be searching for words, which struck Nora as odd for a man who had spoken with such confidence the day before. I wanted to make sure you weren't suffering any other consequences from yesterday. Sometimes people in small towns can be quick to believe the worst, even after the truth comes out. Understanding dawned. You're worried about my reputation. He nodded. It wouldn't be the first time an innocent person continued to pay for crimes they didn't commit, even after being cleared. That's thoughtful of you, but Mrs. Holloway doesn't seem concerned. And honestly, I don't have much of a social standing to worry about in Shafter. I keep to myself mostly. Tucker studied her for a moment, and Nora had the unsettling feeling that he was seeing more than she intended to reveal. By choice or necessity? The question was too direct, too perceptive. Nora looked away, focusing on a butterfly that had landed on one of Mrs. Holloway's marigolds. Both, perhaps. I came to Shafter for a fresh start. The fewer questions asked about my past, the better. She hadn't meant to say so much, but something about Tucker O'Malley made her want to be honest, even as every instinct warned her to guard her secrets. I understand that better than most, he said quietly. Then, changing the subject, Diggs is being held over for trial. The sheriff found evidence he's been running this scheme for quite some time. You may be called to testify. Nora's stomach clenched at the thought. I'd rather not draw more attention to myself. Sometimes standing up and being counted is the only way to stop men like Diggs from hurting others. His voice held no judgment, just a simple statement of fact. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the distant clatter of the main street and the buzzing of insects in the garden. Finally, Tucker reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. I noticed you were looking at this before Diggs caused his commotion, he said, handing it to her. Thought you might still want it. Puzzled, Nora unwrapped the package to find the bolt of blue fabric she had been admiring in the market. How did you? Paid for it fair and square this morning. The shop assistant was more than happy to sell it after what happened with his employer. Nora ran her fingers over the fabric, a fine cotton the color of a summer sky. It's beautiful, but I can't accept this. It's too much. Tucker shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her protest. Consider it an apology for not speaking up sooner. I was watching Diggs for a while, waiting to catch him in the act. If I'd stepped in earlier, you might have been spared the whole ordeal. That's hardly something you need to apologize for. You saved me from far worse consequences. She tried to hand the fabric back, but he made no move to take it. Please. It would ease my conscience. Something in his expression made further argument impossible. Nora carefully rewrapped the fabric. Thank you, it's very kind of you. He stood abruptly, as if embarrassed by her gratitude. I should let you get back to work. Wait, Nora said, rising as well. You never said what business is keeping you in Shafter. Tucker picked up his hat, turning it in his hands before meeting her gaze. I'm staying on at the Triple H for a few weeks, breaking horses for Henry Holloway. After that, he shrugged. The wind takes me where it will. Well, perhaps we'll see each other again before the wind calls you away. A smile, the first genuine one she had seen from him, transformed his face. I'd like that, Miss Vaughn. Nora, she corrected. After yesterday, I think we can dispense with formalities, Mr. O'Malley. Tucker, he returned, settling his hat on his head. And yes, Nora, I believe we'll be seeing each other again very soon. With that promise lingering between them, he turned and walked back through the shop, leaving Nora with a bolt of blue fabric and more questions than answers about the man who had come to her rescue. The Triple H Ranch sprawled across the rolling hills, 10 miles outside Shafter, a testament to Henry Holloway's 20 years of hard work and determination. Tucker had been there 3 days now, working from dawn till dusk with the string of half-wild Mustangs Holloway had purchased from traders passing through the territory. It was exhausting work, but Tucker preferred the honest fatigue of physical labor to the restlessness that plagued him when idle. Never seen anyone with your touch, Henry remarked as Tucker led a now docile bay gelding from the corral. The rancher, a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a face weathered by sun and wind, leaned against the fence post watching. That horse was trying to kill anything that came near him 2 days ago. Tucker patted the horse's neck. He just needed to understand we weren't going to hurt him. Most creatures are the same that way, they lash out from fear, not malice. Henry nodded thoughtfully. Same could be said for people, I reckon. He squinted at Tucker. Speaking of people, Martha tells me you paid a visit to that seamstress girl, the one from the marketplace incident. Tucker concentrated on loosening the saddle cinch, avoiding Henry's knowing gaze. Just wanted to make sure she wasn't facing any backlash. Uh-huh. Henry's tone made it clear he suspected more to the story. Well, Martha's invited her to Sunday dinner tomorrow. Says the girl needs more friends in town. You're welcome to join us, of course. Tucker hesitated. It had been a long time since he'd sat down to a proper family meal, longer still since he'd allowed himself to form attachments in any of the places he passed through. There were reasons he kept moving, reasons he guarded his solitude. But the memory of Nora Vaughn's green eyes and the quiet dignity with which she had faced her accusers lingered. There was a story there. He was certain, a past she was running from, not unlike his own. It made him curious in a way he hadn't been about another person in years. "That's kind of Mrs. Holloway," he said finally. "If you're sure I wouldn't be intruding." Henry chuckled. "Son, Martha's been trying to civilize me for 30 years with limited success. Having another man at the table might take some of the pressure off. Besides, Emily will be there with her husband and the baby. It'll be good for you to see that not all of us out here live like solitary wolves." Emily was the Holloway's daughter, married to the local doctor. Tucker had met her briefly when she brought lunch out to the ranch hands the previous day, a lively young woman with her mother's kind eyes and her father's forthright manner. "All right then," Tucker agreed, surprising himself. "I'll be there." "Good." Henry slapped him on the shoulder. "Now, what do you say we tackle that black stallion next? The one that nearly took Jim's arm off yesterday." Tucker grinned, grateful for the return to familiar territory. "Lead the way." Sunday dawned clear and promising to be another scorcher. Tucker rose early, as was his habit, and spent the morning working with the horses, despite it being a day of rest for the other ranch hands. By midday, he had washed up and changed into his cleanest shirt, dark blue with pearl snaps that he reserved for occasions requiring something more than his usual trail-worn attire. He rode into town on a sorrel mare Henry had lent him, his thoughts circling back to Nora more frequently than he cared to admit. There was something about her that had gotten under his skin, a vulnerability she tried to hide beneath a composed exterior, a strength that showed through despite her circumstances. Whatever had brought her to Shafter alone, he suspected it wasn't a happy story. The Holloway home sat on the north end of town, a handsome two-story structure painted white with green shutters and a wide front porch. As Tucker approached, he could see Martha Holloway through the front window, moving about the dining room arranging flowers. He tied his horse to the hitching post and straightened his shirt before climbing the steps and knocking on the door. Martha answered with a warm smile. "Tucker, right on time. Come in, come in. Henry's in the parlor with Dr. Wilson, that's our son-in-law, and Emily's in the kitchen with me. Nora should be arriving any minute." The house smelled of roasting beef and fresh baked bread, reminding Tucker sharply of a home he hadn't seen in more than a decade. He followed Martha through to the parlor where Henry and a younger man were engaged in a discussion about recent cattle thefts in the county. "Ah, here he is," Henry said, rising to greet Tucker. "James, this is Tucker O'Malley, the horse tamer I was telling you about. Tucker, Doctor James Wilson, my son-in-law and the finest physician west of the Mississippi, if you believe my daughter." Dr. Wilson, a slender man with spectacles and an intelligent face, smiled as they shook hands. "Henry exaggerates on both counts, I'm afraid, but it's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. O'Malley. I've heard about your intervention at the market. Quite impressive." Tucker nodded, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just happened to be in the right place." "And observant enough to catch what others missed," James added. "That's rare in my experience." Before Tucker could respond, a knock at the door announced another arrival. Martha hurried to answer it, and moments later returned with Nora Vaughn. Tucker had thought his memory might have embellished her beauty, but if anything, it had failed to do her justice. She wore a simple dress of deep green that brought out her eyes, her copper hair pinned up but with a few curls escaped to frame her face. She carried a small basket covered with a cloth. "Nora, dear, You didn't need to bring anything, Martha was saying. It's just some honey biscuits, Nora replied. My mother's recipe. I couldn't come empty-handed after your kind invitation. Her gaze found Tucker's then, and he saw surprise followed by something that might have been pleasure cross her face. Mr. O'Malley, I didn't expect to see you here. Tucker's working for Henry, Martha explained, taking the basket. Breaking those wild mustangs. We couldn't let him fend for himself on a Sunday. Emily emerged from the kitchen then, wiping her hands on her apron. She was visibly expecting, perhaps 5 or 6 months along, with a glow about her that spoke of happiness. You must be Nora, she said, embracing the newcomer as if they were old friends rather than strangers. I'm Emily Wilson. Mother's told me so much about your work at the shop. And this, she said, turning to Tucker, must be the mysterious horseman everyone's talking about. Hardly mysterious, Tucker protested, but Emily waved him off. In a town like Shafter, anyone who isn't born and raised here or married to someone who was is automatically mysterious. She linked her arm through Nora's. Come help me in the kitchen while the men talk about boring things like cattle and weather. I want to hear all about Boston. As the women disappeared into the kitchen, Tucker found himself drawn into conversation with Henry and James about the changing landscape of Texas as more settlers arrived, and the open range gradually gave way to fenced properties. It was the kind of discussion he might normally avoid, too close to politics for comfort, but he found James's perspectives thoughtful and Henry's experiences illuminating. When they were called to dinner 20 minutes later, Tucker realized he had been more engaged in the conversation than he'd been with other people in a very long time. It was a disconcerting thought. The dining room table was set with what was clearly Martha's best china, a feast laid out that would have fed twice their number. Tucker found himself seated across from Nora, with Emily on his left and Henry at the head of the table. As they passed dishes and filled plates, the conversation flowed easily among the Holloways and James, with occasional questions directed to their guests to include them. So, Nora, Henry said as he carved the roast, Martha tells me you're from Boston originally. What brought you all the way to our dusty corner of Texas? Tucker noticed the slight tensing of Nora's shoulders, though her expression remained pleasant. A desire for adventure, I suppose, an opportunity. There are more seamstresses in Boston than there are people needing clothes, it sometimes seems. It wasn't a lie, Tucker thought, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Henry seemed to sense the same but was kind enough not to press. Well, we're fortunate to have you, Martha said. The ladies of Shafter have never been so well dressed. Nora smiled, genuine this time. Thank you. I love the work and everyone has been very welcoming. Her eyes flicked to Tucker briefly, despite the occasional misunderstanding. That reminds me, James said. Sheriff Wilson, no relation, by the way, told me they found evidence linking Diggs to similar schemes in at least 4 other towns. Apparently, he's been at this for years, preying on travelers and newcomers. It's disgraceful, Martha declared. Taking advantage of people who can't easily defend themselves. It happens more than most realize, Tucker said quietly. Not everyone has the means or standing to fight back against false accusations. Is that why you got involved? Emily asked, her direct gaze reminding him of her father's. Because you've seen it before, Tucker considered his answer carefully. I believe in justice where I can find it or make it when necessary. A dangerous philosophy, James observed, though his tone held no censure. The law exists for a reason. The law isn't always just, Tucker countered, or accessible to everyone equally. True enough, Henry agreed. Though I'd say Shafter's better than most in that regard. Sheriff Wilson's a fair man, not easily swayed by money or status. Which is why he listened when Tucker spoke up, Nora added. In another town, with another sheriff, things might have gone very differently. The conversation shifted then to local matters: the coming harvest festival, plans for expanding the schoolhouse, the new families that had arrived in the last month. Throughout the meal, Tucker found his attention repeatedly drawn to Nora. She spoke little, but when she did, her comments were thoughtful and sometimes surprisingly witty. There was an intelligence behind those green eyes that intrigued him, along with a guardedness that mirrored his own. After the main course had been cleared and Martha's apple pie served, Emily directed the conversation back to their guests. "So, Tucker, Nora, are either of you planning to settle permanently in Shafter? Or is this just a stopping point?" Nora glanced at Tucker, as if curious about his answer. "I haven't stayed anywhere permanently in a long time," he admitted, "but Shafter has its attractions." "And you, Nora?" Emily pressed. "I came here intending to stay," Nora said after a moment. "I'd like to build something lasting if I can." "Well, we certainly hope you do," Martha said warmly. "Both of you." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink visible through the dining room windows, Tucker realized he had spent hours in the company of the Holloways and their guests, without once feeling the need to retreat to solitude. It was a novel sensation, one that left him both unsettled and strangely content. When Nora announced she needed to head back to her lodgings before full dark, Tucker saw an opportunity. "I should be heading back to the ranch as well," he said, rising. "Miss Vaughn, would you allow me to escort you home? These streets can be unpredictable after sundown." If anyone at the table found his offer presumptuous, they were kind enough not to show it. Nora hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Thank you, that would be appreciated." After a round of warm goodbyes and promises to visit again soon, Tucker found himself walking beside Nora down Shafter's Main Street, his horse trailing behind them on a loose lead. The evening air had cooled slightly, bringing relief from the day's heat, and the street was quiet with most businesses closed for Sunday. "The Holloways are good people," Nora said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "They are. Been a while since I've known a family like that." She glanced at him curiously. "Do you have family somewhere?" It was a simple question, but one Tucker usually deflected. Tonight, however, the lingering warmth of the Holloway's hospitality made him more forthcoming than usual. "Had a mother and father in Missouri. Father died when I was 16. Mother remarried a few years later. Last I heard, they were doing well enough." He kept his tone neutral, giving no hint of the complicated emotions that lay beneath the bare facts. "And you've been traveling since then?" Nora asked, perceptive enough to sense there was more to the story. Tucker nodded. "More or less. Found I had a way with horses that people were willing to pay for. Keeps me fed and moving." "Don't you ever get tired of moving?" The question caught him off guard, not because he hadn't asked it of himself, but because he hadn't expected her to cut so quickly to the heart of his existence. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but staying in one place comes with complications I've learned to avoid." They had reached the boarding house where Nora rented a room, a respectable establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Chen. Light spilled from the windows, casting a warm glow on the small front garden. "What kind of complications?" Nora asked, pausing at the gate. Tucker studied her in the gathering dusk. "The kind that come from letting people get close enough to ask questions I'd rather not answer." A smile touched her lips. "Questions like the ones I'm asking now." "Exactly like those," she nodded, accepting his boundary without offense. "Well, for what it's worth, I understand the value of a fresh start without prying eyes. It's part of why I chose Shafter. And the other part, it was far enough from Boston that no one would think to look for me here." The admission seemed to surprise her as much as him. She bit her lip as if regretting the momentary candor. Tucker didn't press, recognizing the weight of what she had shared. Instead, he changed the subject. "I'd like to see you again, Nora, if that would be agreeable to you." Relief and something warmer flickered in her eyes. "I would like that too." "Good." He took a step back, mindful of propriety. "Perhaps I could call on you next Sunday, if Mrs. Holloway can spare you from another dinner invitation." "I'd enjoy that." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you again for today. Not just the escort home, but for being at the Holloways. It made what could have been an awkward afternoon much more enjoyable." "I felt the same." Tucker touched the brim of his hat. "Good night, Nora." "Good night, Tucker." As he walked away, leading his horse back toward the road that would take him to the Triple H, Tucker reflected on the unexpected turns his life had taken since arriving in Shafter. He had come tracking digs, determined to see justice done for the man's previous victims, never anticipating that he would find himself drawn to this place, and its people, one person in particular, in a way he hadn't experienced in years. It was dangerous, this feeling. He had learned the hard way that attachments led to vulnerability, and vulnerability led to pain. Yet as he mounted his horse and turned toward the ranch, Tucker couldn't bring himself to regret the connections he was forming in Shafter. For the first time in a very long time, the prospect of staying in one place didn't fill him with dread. The week passed in a blur of work for Nora. With the harvest festival approaching, more women than usual were ordering new dresses or having old ones altered, keeping her fingers busy with needle and thread from dawn until dusk. She welcomed the distraction, finding that when her mind wasn't occupied, it tended to wander to thoughts of Tucker O'Malley, his quiet confidence, the flashes of vulnerability she occasionally glimpsed beneath his reserved exterior, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. It was foolish, she told herself repeatedly. She had come to Shafter to escape one set of complications. The last thing she needed was to invite new ones. And yet, when Saturday evening arrived and she found herself preparing for his visit the following day, Nora couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. She was pressing her best day dress, the blue one she had made from the fabric Tucker had given her, when a knock at her door startled her. It was nearly 9 o'clock, well past the hour for casual visitors. "Who is it?" she called, setting the iron aside carefully. "Telegram for Miss Vaughn," came the reply. Frowning, Nora opened the door to find young Billy Jenkins, the telegraph operator's son, clutching a yellow envelope. "Sorry to disturb you so late, miss," he said, handing her the telegram. "Pa said it seemed important." "Thank you, Billy." She fumbled in her pocket for a coin, which the boy accepted with a gap-toothed smile before dashing back down the stairs. Closing the door, Nora stared at the envelope with growing dread. No one in Shafter would have reason to telegraph her, which meant the message came from her past, a past she had been desperately trying to outrun. With trembling fingers, she tore open the envelope and unfolded the message inside. "Found you, stop arriving Tuesday, stop matter, requires immediate resolution, stop Maxwell Blackford." The room seemed to spin around her. Maxwell had found her. After months of careful planning, after traveling halfway across the country, after believing she had finally escaped his reach, he had tracked her down. Nora sank onto the edge of her bed, the telegram crumpled in her fist. Tuesday, just 3 days away. Not enough time to run again. Not without abandoning everything she had built in Shafter, her position with Mrs. Holloway, the reputation she had carefully cultivated, the fragile beginnings of friendship with the Holloways, and whatever was developing between her and Tucker. The thought of him brought a fresh wave of panic. What would he think when Maxwell arrived, spouting his accusations. Would he believe her denials, or would he, like so many in Boston, accept Maxwell's version of events simply because of who he was? Sleep eluded Nora that night as she paced her small room, weighing her options. By morning, she had made her decision. She couldn't run again. She was tired of running, tired of looking over her shoulder. This time, she would stand her ground and face Maxwell, whatever the consequences. Sunday dawned bright and clear, mocking her troubled state of mind. Nora dressed mechanically, choosing the blue dress despite her impulse to wear something less noticeable. If this was to be one of her last days of freedom in Shafter, she wanted to face it with dignity. When Tucker arrived at 2 o'clock as arranged, Nora was waiting on the boarding house porch, her composure as carefully assembled as her appearance. She had considered canceling their outing, but the thought of spending the day alone with her fears had been unbearable. "Afternoon," Tucker greeted her, removing his hat. He looked different today, freshly shaved, his dark hair still damp from washing, wearing a clean white shirt under his vest. The sight of him made her heart ache with what might have been, in another life where her past didn't threaten to destroy her future. "Hello," she managed, forcing a smile. "You look nice, as do you." His eyes lingered on her dress. "Blue suits you. Thank you. I made it from the fabric you gave me." Something shifted in his expression, pleasure mixed with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "I thought that might be the case. I'm honored you chose to use it that way." Mrs. Chen, ever vigilant about propriety, appeared at the door behind Nora. "Will you be back for supper, Miss Vaughn?" "Yes, Mrs. Chen, we're just going for a walk." The older woman nodded approvingly. "Enjoy the fine weather then." As they set off down the street, Tucker offered his arm and Nora took it, acutely aware of his strength beside her. They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Tucker spoke. "I thought we might visit the river. It's peaceful there on Sundays, and there's a spot with a good view of the hills." Nora nodded, grateful for his suggestion. The river was on the opposite side of town from the telegraph office, reducing the chance of running into anyone who might have news about her telegram. The Broken Spoke River, named for an incident involving an early settler's wagon, curved around the western edge of Shafter before continuing south. A well-worn path followed its course, offering pleasant walking away from the dust and noise of the town. As they strolled, Tucker pointed out various plants and birds, displaying a knowledge of the natural world that surprised and impressed Nora. "How do you know so much about these things?" she asked as he identified a hawk circling overhead. "When you spend as much time as I have moving from place to place, you learn to notice what's around you," he replied. "The land speaks if you're willing to listen." "And what does it say?" He glanced at her, a smile tugging at his lips. "Right now." "That we're being watched by a family of rabbits about 10 yards to our left." Nora followed his gaze and, sure enough, spotted the twitching noses of 3 rabbits partially concealed in a patch of brush. "That's remarkable. I would never have seen them." "It's just practice," he said, though she could tell he was pleased by her admiration. They continued along the path until they reached a bend in the river where a large cottonwood tree offered shade. Tucker led her to a flat rock beneath its branches that overlooked both the flowing water and the distant hills. "This is lovely," Nora said as they sat, keeping a respectable distance between them. "Found it my second day in Shafter. I come here to think sometimes when the bunkhouse gets too crowded." "You prefer solitude then?" she asked, genuinely curious about this man who seemed so self-contained yet had gone out of his way to defend a stranger. Tucker considered the question. "I'm used to it. Doesn't mean I always prefer it." Their conversation meandered after that, touching on their respective work, life in Shafter compared to other places they'd been, books they had read. Nora found herself relaxing despite her worries, drawn in by Tucker's thoughtful observations and the ease of his company. "You mentioned your mother's biscuit recipe yesterday," he said as the afternoon shadows lengthened. "Were you close to your parents?" The question brought a pang of both fondness and grief. "Yes, very. They died within a year of each other when I was 19. My father from pneumonia, my mother from what the doctor called a weakened heart, though I think it was really from losing him. They were devoted to each other." "I'm sorry," Tucker said softly. "That must have been difficult." "It was. Is." Nora looked out over the river, remembering. "They had a small tailor shop in Boston. My father did the cutting and fitting, my mother the finishing work. I grew up watching them create beautiful things together." "Is that where you learned to sew?" Nora nodded. "By the time I was 12, I was helping with simple alterations. By 16, I could construct an entire dress from pattern to final stitch." Pride colored her voice. "After they died, I took over the shop for a while, but it wasn't the same without them." She fell silent, unwilling to continue into the part of her story that involved Maxwell Blackford and his family's role in forcing her to sell the shop, and the subsequent events that had led to her flight from Boston. Tucker seemed to sense her reluctance to elaborate. "They would be proud of you," he said simply, "carrying on their craft so skillfully." The words touched her deeply. "Thank you. I like to think they would be." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Tucker suggested they start back to town. They walked more slowly this time, both seemingly reluctant for the afternoon to end. "May I ask you something?" Nora said as the first houses of Shafter came into view. "You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer." "Fair enough." She hesitated, then pressed on. "You said you track men like Diggs, make sure they face justice. Why? What made you take on that role?" Tucker was quiet for so long that Nora thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "When I was 18, my stepsister was accused of stealing a valuable brooch from a shop in our town. The shopkeeper was respected. She was just a girl of 16 with no standing. No one believed her denials." His jaw tightened at the memory. "She was sent to a reformatory for a year. 6 months after she went in, another girl was caught with the same brooch. Turned out the shopkeeper had been doing exactly what Diggs did, planting items on young women, then offering to drop charges in exchange for favors." Nora's heart constricted at the implications. "What happened to your stepsister?" "They released her, but the damage was done. Her reputation was ruined and the experience in that place." He shook his head. "She was never the same. Left home as soon as she could, headed west. I get a letter every now and then, but she doesn't stay in one place long enough for me to find her. And the shopkeeper faced no consequences. Too well connected." Tucker's expression hardened. "That's when I learned that justice isn't always served by the law. Sometimes it needs a helping hand." "So you became that hand," Nora said softly. He nodded. "For Sarah, and for others who might suffer the same fate if men like that are allowed to continue unchecked." They had reached the boarding house. The lamps were being lit along the main street, casting pools of golden light in the gathering dusk. Nora turned to face Tucker, moved by what he had shared. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "And for a lovely afternoon. I needed it more than you know." Something in her tone must have alerted him. "Is everything all right, Nora?" For a moment, she was tempted to tell him everything about Maxwell, about the telegram, about the accusations that had driven her from Boston. But fear held her back. If Tucker knew the truth, would he still look at her with that warmth in his eyes? Or would doubt creep in, as it had with others who had once called themselves her friends? "Just tired," she said instead. "It's been a busy week at the shop." He studied her face, and she had the distinct impression he knew she wasn't being entirely truthful, but he didn't press. "I've taken enough of your time, then. You should rest." He took a step back, replacing his hat. "Would it be presumptuous to ask if I might call on you again next Sunday?" The question caught in Nora's chest. By next Sunday, everything might be different. Maxwell would have arrived, bringing his accusations and demands. Her life in Shafter might be in shambles. "I'd like that," she said anyway, clinging to the hope that somehow she would find a way to face Maxwell and emerge with her new life intact. Tucker's smile was worth the possible lie. "Until then, Nora." "Good night, Tucker." She watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the gathering darkness. Only when he was out of sight did she allow the mask of composure to slip, revealing the fear and uncertainty that had been her constant companions since receiving the telegram. Whatever happened when Maxwell arrived, Nora vowed she would face it with the same courage Tucker had shown in defending his stepsister's honor. She was done running. This time, she would stand and fight for the life she was building in Shafter, and for the possibility of a future that now, against all odds, included Tucker O'Malley. Monday passed in a haze of anxiety for Nora. She went through the motions at work, grateful that Mrs. Holloway was too preoccupied with a large order for the Harvest Festival to notice her distraction. By evening, she had made her decision. She would tell Tucker the truth before Maxwell arrived, giving him a chance to hear her side of the story first. The opportunity came sooner than expected. As she was closing up the shop Tuesday evening, Tucker appeared in the doorway, his expression serious. "Tucker," she said, startled by his unexpected presence. "I wasn't expecting to see you until Sunday. I was in town picking up supplies for the ranch." He stepped inside, removing his hat. "Nora, there's something you should know. A man arrived on the afternoon stage asking questions about you." Her heart sank. Maxwell had arrived a day early, no doubt hoping to catch her unprepared. "What kind of questions?" "Describing you, asking where you work, where you live." Tucker's eyes narrowed. He didn't give his name, but he was well-dressed, Eastern accent. Mentioned he was an old acquaintance of yours from Boston. "Did you speak with him?" Tucker shook his head. "Overheard him at the hotel. Didn't like the way he was going about it, secretive, like he didn't want you to know he was looking." Nora set down the fabric she had been folding, her hands no longer steady enough for the task. "His name is Maxwell Blackford, and you're right to be suspicious of his intentions." "Who is he to you?" The moment had come sooner than she'd planned, but perhaps it was better this way. "Can you stay a while? It's a long story and not a pleasant one." Tucker's expression softened. "I have time." Mrs. Holloway had already left for the day, giving them privacy. Nora gestured to the small sitting area at the front of the shop where customers sometimes waited, and they each took a seat. "I told you my parents died when I was 19, she began. "What I didn't say was what happened after. I tried to keep the shop going, but business declined without my father's reputation to sustain it. The building owner, Maxwell's father, Elias Blackford, raised the rent beyond what I could afford." Tucker's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "Maxwell offered a solution. He would convince his father to sell me the building at a fair price, allowing me to continue my parents' legacy." Nora's voice grew bitter at the memory. "I was naive enough to believe him. I didn't realize it was just a ploy to get close to me." "He had other intentions," Tucker supplied, his voice carefully neutral. Nora nodded. "He began calling regularly, bringing small gifts, escorting me to social functions. At first I was flattered. The Blackfords were one of Boston's most prominent families, and Maxwell was considered quite a catch. But then I realized he had no respect for my work or my independence. He spoke of the shop as a charming hobby that I would naturally give up after we were married. And you never agreed to marry him, Tucker guessed. No. When I made it clear I had no interest in becoming Mrs. Maxwell Blackford, things turned ugly. The rent increased again. Clients began canceling orders. Rumors circulated that my father had left significant debts, that the quality of my work was inferior. Nora's hands clenched in her lap. I was forced to sell the shop for far less than its worth to a company owned by Elias Blackford, though I didn't discover that until later. Tucker's expression darkened. That's despicable. It gets worse, Nora said quietly. After I sold, I took a position with a fashionable dressmaker. The pay was poor, but it was honest work. One day, Maxwell came to the shop, ostensibly to order a gift for his mother. He asked to speak with me privately. She swallowed hard, the memory still vivid. He said if I reconsidered his proposal, all my troubles would disappear. When I refused again, he became angry. There was a struggle. A valuable necklace that had been left for repair went missing. Understanding dawned in Tucker's eyes, and he accused you of stealing it. Yes. His word against mine, the son of Elias Blackford versus a seamstress with questionable character. I was dismissed immediately. No other shop would hire me. The police came to my lodgings with questions. Nora looked up at Tucker, needing him to understand. I didn't take it, Tucker. I would never. I believe you, he said firmly. You don't need to convince me. Relief washed through her at his immediate acceptance of her word. Thank you. That means more than you know. So you left Boston, Tucker prompted. I had a distant cousin in Chicago who took me in briefly, but Maxwell's reach was longer than I anticipated. Somehow he tracked me there and the accusations began again. I moved to St. Louis, then Kansas City, then finally here. Nora sighed heavily. I thought I had finally escaped him. Shafter seemed too small, too remote for him to bother with. But Saturday night I received a telegram. He's found me again. Tucker was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he asked, What does he want from you, Nora? After all this time, why keep pursuing you? It was the question she had asked herself countless times. Control, revenge for wounded pride. I'm not entirely sure, but I do know he won't stop until he gets what he wants or until someone stops him. And what do you want? The question startled her. No one had asked that before. I want to be left in peace, to build a life here without looking over my shoulder, to practice my craft and maybe, someday, open my own shop again. She hesitated, then added softly, to have the chance to see where. Certain new friendships might lead. Tucker held her gaze, understanding her meaning. Then that's what we'll fight for. You didn't think I'd let you face this alone, did you? His expression was resolute. I meant what I told you by the river. Sometimes justice needs a helping hand. For the first time since receiving the telegram, Nora felt a glimmer of hope. What do you suggest we do? First, we need to understand exactly what he's planning. If he's come all this way, he must have a strategy beyond simply making more accusations. Tucker leaned forward, his expression intense. When and where were you supposed to meet him? The telegram didn't specify. He just said he was arriving Tuesday today and that the matter required immediate resolution. Then he'll likely seek you out tomorrow, either here or at your lodgings. Tucker's mind was clearly working through possibilities. We need to be prepared for whatever he brings to the table. He'll have evidence, Nora said bitterly. He always does. Fabricated, of course, but convincing to those who don't know better. Then we'll need to ensure the right people do know better. Tucker stood, his decision made. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to have a conversation with Sheriff Wilson. He should know what's coming before Blackford tries to manipulate him. Will he believe you? Believe me. Nora couldn't keep the doubt from her voice. Maxwell is very convincing. Wilson's a fair man, and he's already seen how false accusations can be used against the vulnerable, thanks to Diggs. Besides, Tucker added with a hint of a smile, he owes me a favor for breaking that unruly stallion of his last spring. Despite her anxiety, Nora found herself smiling back. You seem to have a talent for taming wild things. Some things aren't meant to be tamed, he replied, his gaze holding hers. Just given the space and support to be themselves without fear. The words touched something deep within her, a recognition that he truly saw her in a way few others ever had. It's getting late, Tucker said, glancing at the darkening street outside. I'll walk you home, and tomorrow we'll face Blackford together. You don't have to do this, Nora said as they stepped out into the evening air. It isn't your fight. Tucker offered her his arm. It became my fight the moment he threatened someone I care about. The simple declaration warmed her despite the cool night breeze. As they walked toward her boarding house, Nora felt the weight that had been pressing on her since receiving the telegram begin to lift slightly. Whatever happened tomorrow, she wouldn't be facing it alone. Maxwell Blackford arrived at Mrs. Holloway's dress shop just after 10 the following morning, exactly as Tucker had predicted. Nora was ready for him, having spent a nearly sleepless night preparing herself mentally for the confrontation. Mrs. Holloway, briefed on the situation by Nora earlier that morning, had taken the unusual step of closing the shop for the day, giving them privacy for whatever might unfold. When the bell above the door announced his arrival, Nora was standing behind the counter, her back straight and her expression composed. Tucker, as planned, was nowhere to be seen, waiting in Mrs. Holloway's office at the back of the shop until the right moment. Maxwell had changed little in the months since she had last seen him. Still handsome in the conventional way of Boston's elite tall, fair-haired, impeccably dressed in a suit that spoke of wealth and privilege. His blue eyes, once capable of charming smiles that had briefly fooled her, now held only cold calculation as they locked on her face. "Nora," he said, removing his hat. "You're looking well. Country air must agree with you. What do you want, Maxwell?" She saw no point in pretending this was a friendly visit. He clicked his tongue in disapproval. "Now, is that any way to greet an old friend? After I've come all this way to see you. We were never friends, and you didn't come here for a social call." Maxwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. Direct as ever. "Very well, let's not waste time. I've come to offer you a proposition. I'm not interested in anything you have to offer. You haven't heard it yet." He set his hat on the counter, making himself at home. "It's quite simple, really. Return to Boston with me, and I'll ensure all charges against you are dropped. You can start fresh under my protection, of course." Nora's eyes narrowed. "Charges? What charges?" "Oh, did I forget to mention? The necklace that went missing from Madame Beaufort's shop, the one you stole, was a family heirloom belonging to the governor's wife. She's quite determined to see the thief brought to justice." His smile turned predatory. "I have signed statements from 3 witnesses who saw you with it last." "That's a lie," Nora said, her voice steady despite the cold fear spreading through her. "And we both know it." Maxwell shrugged. "Truth is often a matter of perspective, and my perspective, backed by the Blackford name and those witness statements, carries considerable weight." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "Be reasonable, Nora. You can't keep running forever. Eventually, your past will catch up to you in every dusty little town you flee to." "Is that what this is about? Making me run again?" Nora asked, genuine curiosity mingling with her anger. "Why can't you simply leave me in peace?" Something flashed in Maxwell's eyes, a glimpse of the rage he usually kept carefully controlled. "Because you humiliated me. You, a nobody, dared to reject me. Do you have any idea how many women in Boston would give anything to be Mrs. Maxwell Blackford? Then perhaps you should have proposed to one of them, Nora replied evenly. Someone who values your money and name more than her own dignity. Maxwell's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist in a painful grip reminiscent of digs in the marketplace. You will regret your insolence. I've been lenient until now, giving you the chance to come to your senses, but my patience has limits. The back door opened, and Tucker stepped into the shop, his presence filling the room instantly. I'd suggest you remove your hand from the lady, Blackford. Maxwell turned, surprised by the interruption. His eyes narrowed as he assessed Tucker, the worn clothing, the sun-browned skin, the unwavering gaze. And you are, Tucker O'Malley, a friend of Miss Vaughn's. Ah, the local help. Maxwell's dismissive tone made it clear what he thought of Tucker. This is a private conversation. I suggest you leave us. Tucker didn't move. I heard enough to know this conversation is over. Miss Vaughn has made her position clear. Maxwell's grip tightened on Nora's wrist, causing her to wince. This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. Nora and I have unfinished business. In 2 swift strides, Tucker closed the distance between them. His hand clamped onto Maxwell's forearm, applying pressure until the other man was forced to release Nora. Touch her again, Tucker said quietly, and you'll be leaving Shafter with more than just a bruised ego. Maxwell stepped back, straightening his jacket with exaggerated care. Violence, how predictable from someone of your station. He turned to Nora. Is this your protector now? A saddle tramp with dirt under his fingernails. My, how your standards have fallen. Before either Nora or Tucker could respond, the shop door opened again, admitting Sheriff Wilson and Mrs. Holloway. Ah, perfect timing, Maxwell said, his confidence returning at the sight of the lawman. Sheriff, I'd like to report an assault and the harboring of a fugitive from justice. Sheriff Wilson regarded him coolly. You must be Blackford. I've been expecting you. Maxwell blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. You have. Got a telegraph from the Boston police yesterday, responding to my inquiry about one Nora Vaughn. The sheriff pulled a paper from his pocket. Interesting reading. Seems there was an accusation of theft, but no charges were ever filed officially, and the supposed witnesses, all employed by Elias Blackford in some capacity. Color drained from Maxwell's face. There must be some mistake. The Boston police assured me that they'd handle it. Sheriff Wilson raised an eyebrow. They might have if the governor's wife had actually reported a necklace stolen. But according to her personal secretary, all of her jewelry is accounted for. Has been for years. Nora felt a surge of gratitude toward Tucker, who must have arranged for the sheriff to make these inquiries. She glanced at him, finding his gaze already on her, steady and reassuring. Furthermore, the sheriff continued, I've received statements from merchants in 3 different towns describing a pattern of harassment that followed Miss Vaughn after she rejected your advances. Harassment that bears a remarkable resemblance to what you're attempting here today. Maxwell's composure was cracking. This is absurd. You can't possibly believe what I believe, Sheriff Wilson interrupted, is that you've come to my town to cause trouble for a respected member of our community, and I don't take kindly to that, Mrs. Holloway stepped forward then, her usually kind face stern as she addressed Maxwell. Miss Vaughn is not only my finest seamstress but a dear friend to my family. Whatever grievance you think you have against her, I suggest you take it elsewhere. She has found a home in Shafter, and we protect our own. The support from Mrs. Holloway brought unexpected tears to Nora's eyes. She had never dared hope for such acceptance, such belonging. Maxwell looked from one face to another, seemingly realizing for the first time that he had miscalculated badly. His gaze settled on Nora, and the cold fury she saw there sent a chill through her. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You think you've won, but I'll make sure you regret this day." Tucker moved to stand beside Nora, his presence solid and reassuring. "It is over, Blackford. Miss Vaughn has made her choice clear. I suggest you respect it and return to Boston." For a moment, it seemed Maxwell might argue further. Then, with deliberate calm, he retrieved his hat from the counter. "Very well. If that's how you want to play this, Nora." He turned to the sheriff. "I assume I'm free to leave, since there are no charges against me." Sheriff Wilson nodded. "The afternoon stage leaves at 3. I'd strongly suggest you be on it. And if I choose to stay, then I'd be obliged to investigate these allegations of harassment more thoroughly. Might take weeks, months even, during which time you'd be our guest at the Shafter jailhouse." The sheriff's expression made it clear this was not an idle threat. Defeat finally registered on Maxwell's face. "I see. Then I'll be on that stage." He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "Goodbye, Nora. I do hope you'll be happy with the life you've chosen." The bell jangled as he left, and Nora released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Tucker's hand found hers, a gentle pressure that anchored her to the moment. "Thank you," she said, looking from Tucker to Sheriff Wilson to Mrs. Holloway. "All of you. I don't know how to express what this means to me." Mrs. Holloway stepped forward to embrace her. "My dear girl, you've become like family to us. Of course we would stand with you." "I'll make sure he gets on that stage," Sheriff Wilson said. "And I'll have deputies keep an eye out for the next few weeks, just to be safe." He tipped his hat to Nora. "Miss Vaughn." After the sheriff departed, Mrs. Holloway made a show of checking the time. "My goodness, is it that late already? I promised Martha I'd help with the church sewing circle this afternoon." She gathered her shawl and reticule with suspicious haste. "Tucker, would you mind staying with Nora for a bit, just in case that dreadful man returns?" Tucker's lips twitched with amusement at her transparent attempt to give them privacy. "Be happy to, madam." "Excellent. Nora, take the rest of the day. After that ordeal, you deserve some peace." With a final meaningful glance between them, Mrs. Holloway departed, leaving Nora and Tucker alone in the quiet shop. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Tucker squeezed her hand gently. "You handled that well." "I had help," Nora replied, looking up at him with undisguised gratitude. "I don't know how you arranged all that with the sheriff, but it was brilliant." Tucker shrugged, though pleasure at her praise was evident in his eyes. "Wilson's a good man. Once I explained the situation, he was happy to make a few inquiries." His expression grew more serious. "Are you all right?" Truly, the question, asked with such genuine concern, nearly undid her composure. "I will be. It's just, for so long Maxwell has been this shadow hanging over me, following me wherever I went. To have finally confronted him, to have people believe me and stand by me." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "I'm not used to having allies." "You have them now," Tucker said softly. "You have me." The simple declaration held so much meaning. Nora searched his face, seeing in his eyes the same emotion that had been growing in her heart over the past weeks. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly uncertain despite the victory they had just achieved. Tucker's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Now, if you're willing, I'd like to court you properly. No more looking over your shoulder, no more running. Just us, seeing where this road leads." Hope bloomed in Nora's chest, bright and powerful. "I'd like that very much." His smile then was unlike any she had seen from him before, open, unguarded, filled with promise. "Good. Because I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you in that marketplace, standing tall despite everything stacked against you." The words sent a thrill through her. "I think perhaps I've been falling too," she admitted, "though I tried very hard not to." Tucker chuckled. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both so determined to guard our hearts. And yet here we are. Here we are, he agreed, his gaze softening as it held hers. In that moment, with the afternoon sun streaming through the shop windows and the specter of Maxwell Blackford finally banished from her life, Nora felt truly free for the first time in years. Whatever the future held, she would face it with Tucker beside her, not as a rescuer or protector, but as an equal partner in the life they would build together in Shafter. And that, she thought as Tucker's face lowered toward hers for their first kiss, was worth every hardship that had led her to this place, this moment, this man. 6 months later, Nora stood behind the counter of Vaughn's fine tailoring and dressmaking, watching the spring rain patter against the large front window of her shop. The brass bell above the door had been polished to a high shine, matching the new sign that hung proudly above the entrance. It was still hard to believe sometimes that the shop was truly hers, a dream realized through hard work, the support of the community, and the unflagging encouragement of the man who had captured her heart. The past months had been transformative. After Maxwell's departure on that fateful afternoon stage, confirmed personally by Sheriff Wilson, who had watched the coach until it was out of sight, Nora had gradually allowed herself to believe that her past was truly behind her. No more threatening telegrams had arrived, no more accusations had surfaced. Whether Maxwell had finally accepted defeat or simply found another target for his vindictiveness, she couldn't say, but his shadow no longer darkened her days. In his absence, Nora had flourished. Her relationship with Tucker had deepened, their courtship conducted under the approving eyes of the Holloways and the increasingly interested gaze of Shafter's residents. When Mrs. Chen, eager to retire to San Francisco, where her son had established a successful business, had decided to sell the building that housed her boarding house, Tucker had approached Nora with a proposition. The ground floor could be converted to a shop, he had suggested one evening as they walked by the river. Your shop, and the upper floors could remain lodgings, providing steady income while you build your clientele. The idea had taken root immediately. With Tucker's help navigating the financial aspects and the Holloway's enthusiastic support, Nora had secured a loan from the bank. Mrs. Holloway, rather than being upset at losing her best seamstress, had become Nora's first investor, providing capital in exchange for a modest share of the profits. Every successful woman needs other women behind her, Mrs. Holloway had said when presenting Nora with the check. My mother helped me start my shop 20 years ago. I'm simply paying it forward. The renovation had been a community effort, with Henry Holloway organizing ranch hands and townsmen to help with the heavier work during the quiet winter months. Tucker had revealed unexpected talents for carpentry, crafting the beautiful counter where Nora now stood and the cabinets that lined the walls, displaying fabrics and finished items. The shop had opened in early March to great acclaim. The women of Shafter, many of whom had come to know and respect Nora during her time at Mrs. Holloway's, transferred their business eagerly. Word spread to neighboring communities, bringing new customers from as far as 50 miles away. And through it all, Tucker had remained by her side, his quiet strength and unwavering support a constant that Nora had come to rely on. He still worked at the Triple H Ranch, his gift with horses in high demand, but he spent every free moment either helping at the shop or simply being with Nora, their relationship deepening with each passing day. The bell above the door jangled, pulling Nora from her reflections. Tucker stepped inside, shaking raindrops from his hat before hanging it on the rack by the door. Afternoon, he greeted her, his smile warming her as it always did. Quiet day, Mrs. Patterson picked up her daughter's wedding dress this morning, and I've had a few customers browsing, but yes, mostly quiet. Nora came around the counter to meet him. You're back from the Jorgensens early. Tucker nodded, pulling her into a brief embrace. The mare foaled faster than expected. Beautiful little filly with a white blaze, healthy as can be. He looked around the shop. Where's Alice? I sent her home early. The rain was making her joints ache. Alice Winthrop, a widow in her 60s with a talent for intricate embroidery, had become Nora's first employee, a partnership that benefited them both. Good. That means we have some privacy. Tucker's expression turned more serious as he reached into his vest pocket. I have something for you. Nora's curiosity piqued. What is it? Instead of answering directly, Tucker took her hand, leading her to the small sitting area where customers waited during fittings. Once they were seated, he withdrew a folded document from his pocket and handed it to her. Puzzled, Nora opened it to find a deed of ownership for a parcel of land just outside Shafter, 10 acres with a small house and barn, according to the description. Tucker, what is this? She asked, looking up at him in confusion. His eyes held a mixture of nervousness and hope. It's a home, Nora. Our home, if you want it to be, understanding dawned slowly. Are you asking? I'm asking you to marry me. He took both her hands in his gaze never leaving hers. I love you, Nora Vaughn. I love your strength, your determination, your kindness. I love how you've built something beautiful here, despite everything you've faced, and I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Joy bubbled up inside Nora, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Tucker O'Malley, I will marry you. His answering smile was radiant. From his pocket, he produced a small ring, a delicate silver band with a single pearl, simple but elegant. It was my mother's, he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. One of the few things I've carried with me all these years. The weight of what that meant, that he had kept this treasured connection to his past, and now wanted to share it with her, moved Nora deeply. It's beautiful, and it means so much that you want me to have it. Tucker's hand cupped her cheek. You've changed me, Nora. Before you, I was just drifting, seeking justice for Sarah but never really living. You've given me a reason to stop running, to build something lasting. We've changed each other, Nora replied softly. You showed me that I could stand my ground, that I didn't have to keep fleeing from the past. That I could trust again. Their lips met in a tender kiss, sealing the promises they had made. When they parted, Tucker rested his forehead against hers, a gesture that had become familiar and cherished over the months of their courtship. The house needs work, he said, nodding toward the deed still in her hand. But I thought we could make it ours together. It's close enough to town for you to reach the shop easily, but far enough out to give us some peace. It sounds perfect, Nora said, already imagining the life they would build there. When can I see it? How about now? The rain's letting up and it's only a short ride. Nora glanced at the clock. Let me close up the shop and we'll go. As she moved around the shop, turning down lamps and securing displays for the night, Nora's heart felt lighter than it had in years. The shop, the ring on her finger, the deed to a home that would be theirs, these were tangible symbols of how far she had come from that terrifying day in the marketplace when a stranger had stood up and declared her innocent. Tucker waited by the door, his expression soft as he watched her. When she joined him, he offered his arm with the gallantry that never failed to charm her. Ready to see our future home, Miss Vaughn? He asked as they stepped out into the freshly washed streets of Shafter. Lead the way, Mr. O'Malley, she replied, her heart full of love and anticipation for the life they would build together. The early autumn sun cast a golden glow over the landscape as the wedding party gathered under the sprawling branches of the old oak tree on Tucker and Nora's property. 4 months had passed since Tucker's proposal. Months filled with renovations to the small farmhouse, preparations for the wedding, and the day-to-day work of Nora's thriving shop and Tucker's responsibilities at the Triple H. Now, on this perfect September day, with wildflowers dotting the fields and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and pine, they stood ready to join their lives before the friends who had become family. Nora wore a gown of her own creation, ivory silk with delicate lace overlay, simple yet elegant, embodying the practical beauty that defined her. Her copper hair was adorned with a crown of white roses, and in her hands she carried a bouquet of wildflowers gathered that morning from their land. Tucker waited beneath the oak, more formally dressed than she had ever seen him, in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his eyes never leaving her as she approached on Henry Holloway's arm. Reverend Thomas, the circuit preacher who visited Shafter once a month, had arrived the previous day specifically for the occasion. He stood ready to officiate, his well-worn Bible open in his hands, his kind face beaming at the couple before him. "Dearly beloved," he began once Nora had reached Tucker's side, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Tucker O'Malley and Nora Vaughn in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Tucker and Nora had written their own vows, words that spoke of finding hope in unexpected places, of second chances and new beginnings, of a love built on mutual respect and shared dreams. "I take you as you are," Tucker promised, his voice steady and clear, "with your past and your future, your strengths and your doubts. I promise to stand beside you in all things, to build a home with you not just of wood and stone, but of trust and understanding. I promise to be your partner in all things, to cherish the spirit in you that first captured my heart in that marketplace." Nora's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she spoke her own vows. "I take you, Tucker, as my husband and my friend, my confidant and my champion. I promise to face whatever comes with the courage you've helped me find, to create with you a life of purpose and joy. I promise to love you through all seasons, to be the place where you can always rest your heart, as you have been for me." When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering of friends erupted in cheers and applause. Tucker drew Nora into a kiss that seemed to contain every promise they had just made, every hope for their future together. The celebration that followed was as warm and welcoming as the couple themselves. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food prepared by Martha Holloway and the women of Shafter. Lanterns hung from tree branches, ready to illuminate the gathering as evening approached. A local fiddler and his companions provided music, their lively tunes soon tempting guests to clear a space for dancing. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land that was now their home, Tucker led Nora to a quiet spot away from the festivities. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into him. "It still seems like a dream sometimes, the shop, this land, you." She looked up at him, her expression softening. "If someone had told me a year ago that this would be my life, I would never have believed them." Tucker's hand found hers, his thumb brushing over the 2 rings that now adorned her finger, his mother's pearl, and the simple gold band they had exchanged during the ceremony. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment, "about what comes next for us." "Oh," Nora turned to face him more fully, "and what have you decided?" "Well, Mrs. O'Malley," he said, the new title bringing a smile to both their faces, "I've been offered a permanent position at the Triple H breeding and training manager. Henry's looking to expand their horse operation, and he wants me to oversee it." Nora's face lit up. "Tucker, that's wonderful." "You'd be perfect for that role," he nodded, clearly pleased by her reaction. It would mean more stability, regular income to complement what the shop brings in. And he hesitated, a hint of vulnerability in his expression. It would mean putting down real roots here. Understanding the significance of what he was saying, Nora reached up to touch his face gently. "That's what you want, to stay in Shafter permanently?" "It is." His gaze held hers, earnest and certain. "For the first time in more than a decade, I want to stop moving. I want to build something lasting here with you." "Then that's what we'll do," Nora said simply. "Together." The weight of the decision settled around them comfortably, like a familiar blanket. For both of them, committing to stay meant truly letting go of the past, the wandering that had defined Tucker's life since leaving home, the fear that had kept Nora running from place to place. It meant believing that they had found, at last, a place and a person worth staying for. The fiddler struck up a new tune then, a waltz that floated across the evening air toward them. Tucker held out his hand with a smile. "May I have this dance, Mrs. O'Malley?" Nora placed her hand in his without hesitation. "This and every dance to come, Mr. O'Malley." As they returned to their wedding celebration, moving together in perfect harmony under the first stars of evening, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter in a marketplace where he had declared her innocent, to this land they now called home, their paths had converged in ways neither could have imagined. What had begun as an act of justice had blossomed into a love that promised to sustain them through whatever life might bring next. And as Tucker spun her beneath the lantern light, surrounded by the community that had embraced them both, Nora knew with absolute certainty that this man, this place, this life they were creating together was where she truly belonged. 2 years later, Nora sat in the rocking chair on the front porch of their expanded farmhouse, watching as Tucker led their son through the vegetable garden, pointing out the different plants growing in neat rows. At 18 months old, Thomas Henry O'Malley was a curious, energetic child with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, toddling determinedly after butterflies and stopping to examine interesting stones and leaves along the way. The sight of them together, Tucker's tall frame bent protectively over the small boy, their heads close as Tucker explained something about the tomato plants, filled Nora's heart with a contentment she had once believed was beyond her reach. Their life wasn't perfect. There were financial worries sometimes, disagreements to navigate, the perpetual exhaustion of balancing parenthood with their respective work, but it was rich with love and purpose. The shop in town continued to thrive, with Nora now employing 3 seamstresses besides Alice. She spent 3 days a week there, bringing Thomas with her when Tucker's duties at the ranch demanded his full attention. The rest of the time, she worked from the sunny sewing room Tucker had added to the farmhouse the previous winter, creating special order gowns and suits while keeping an eye on their son. Tucker's position at the Triple H had evolved into a partnership with Henry, who had begun to scale back his own involvement as he approached his 60s. The arrangement benefited them. Both Henry maintained an interest in the business he had built, while Tucker brought new ideas and energy to the operation. Under his guidance, the Triple H had developed a reputation for producing some of the finest trained horses in the region, attracting buyers from as far as Dallas and Denver. Their home had grown along with their family and ambitions. What had once been a small 2-room farmhouse was now a comfortable dwelling with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen where they gathered for meals, and Nora's cherished sewing room with large windows that welcomed the morning light. Tucker had built most of the additions himself, with help from friends and hired hands during the quieter seasons at the ranch. Behind the house, A new barn housed their small personal collection of animals: 2 milk cows, a few chickens, Tucker's beloved horses, and a fat orange cat named Marmalade who kept the mice at bay and had appointed himself Thomas's personal guardian. It was a working farm now, providing much of their food and supplementing their income with occasional sales of excess produce and eggs. "Mama! Mama!" Thomas's excited voice drew Nora from her reflections. He came running across the yard, Tucker following at a more measured pace, both of their hands cupped around something. "Look what we found," Thomas said, carefully opening his small palms to reveal a tiny green tree frog. "His name is Hopper. Is that right?" Nora smiled, leaning forward to admire the creature. "Hello, Hopper, you're quite handsome. Da says we can keep him for 1 day, then he goes back to the pond," Thomas explained seriously. "Because that's his home." "That sounds like a wise plan," Nora agreed, glancing up at Tucker with a smile. Their son's kindness toward all living things was a direct reflection of his father's gentle nature, something that filled Nora with pride. "I was thinking we could make a temporary home for Hopper in that glass jar in the kitchen," Tucker suggested, "with some grass and a little water." "What do you think, Thomas?" "Yes." The boy's enthusiasm was infectious. "Can we do it now? Go on in and ask Alice to help you find the jar," Tucker said. "Mama and I will be there in a minute." As Thomas carefully carried his new friend into the house, where Alice Winthrop was preparing their evening meal, Tucker took a seat on the porch step beside Nora's rocking chair. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his hand coming to rest gently on her knee. Nora placed her own hand over his. "Well enough. The morning sickness isn't as bad as it was with Thomas." Tucker nodded, relief evident in his expression. Nora's pregnancy was still in its early months, their secret for now, though they planned to share the news with the Holloways that weekend at Sunday dinner. "I was thinking," Tucker said after a moment, "about how different things might have been if I hadn't been in that marketplace that day." It was a reflection they shared occasionally, the remarkable chain of events that had brought them together and led to this life they had built. "I might still be running," Nora admitted, "or worse, if Maxwell had caught up with me somewhere without friends to stand by me." She squeezed his hand. "But you were there, and here we are." "Here we are," Tucker echoed, his gaze taking in their home, the land they had cultivated, the life they had created together. "I never thought I'd have this, you know. A home, a family, roots, after Sarah, after all those years on the move. It seemed safer to keep going, to never stop long enough to care too deeply about any place or person." "And now," Nora prompted softly. Tucker's smile was answer enough, but he put it into words anyway. "Now I can't imagine any life but this one. With you, with Thomas, with this little one on the way." His hand moved to rest briefly over her still flat stomach. "This is where I belong." From inside the house came the sound of Thomas's laughter, followed by Alice's gentle admonition about something. The afternoon sun bathed the porch in golden light, and in the distance, a meadowlark's clear song carried on the breeze. "We should go in," Nora said, though she made no move to rise, "before Thomas tries to turn the entire kitchen into a frog habitat." Tucker chuckled, standing and offering his hand to help her up. A distinct possibility with that boy. As they walked into their home together, Nora reflected on how far they had come from that fateful day in the marketplace. The journey hadn't always been easy, but every step had led them here, to this house filled with love, to the family they were building, to the deep and abiding partnership they shared. In the end, it wasn't just about Tucker standing up for her that day, declaring her innocent when others were quick to condemn. It was about all the days that followed, the thousand small moments of standing together through challenges and joys, of building a life neither had dared to dream possible. And as they joined their son in creating a temporary home for Hopper the Frog, their laughter mingling in the warm kitchen while Alice looked on with affectionate exasperation, Nora knew with absolute certainty that this man, this child, this home, this life was the greatest gift she had ever received. It was, in every sense, justice served and love fulfilled. And it had all begun with those simple, life-changing words. She is innocent.